The smoke from the burning barn still clung to his skin 3 years later, or at least that was how it felt when Garrett Xavier caught his reflection in still water or a shop window. He pulled his hat lower over his brow as he rode into Jamestown, California on a dusty afternoon in June of 1878, the sun beating down on his shoulders with relentless heat. The scars that twisted the left side of his face from temple to jaw were hidden beneath the wide brim and the shadow it cast, just the way he preferred it. Most folks in these parts knew better than to ask a man about his past, and Garrett aimed to keep it that way. Jamestown was a mining town that had seen better days, though it still bustled with enough activity to make a living if a man was willing to work hard. Garrett had heard they needed ranch hands at the Fairfield property just outside town, and he needed work that would keep him away from prying eyes. He had been drifting for 3 years now, ever since the fire that took his family's ranch in Wyoming and everyone he loved along with it. His mother, his father, his younger brother, all gone in one terrible night while he had been out checking the fence line. He had run into the flames trying to save them, and the burning timber had found him, marking him forever with its cruel touch. He dismounted outside the general store, his muscles aching from days in the saddle. The town was bigger than he expected, with a main street lined with wooden buildings that had been painted at some point but now wore their colors in faded patches. A saloon stood on one corner, a bank on another, and various shops filled the spaces between. People moved about their business, paying him little mind, which suited him fine. Garrett tied his horse to the hitching post and was about to step onto the wooden sidewalk when he heard a commotion from down the street. A wagon had lost a wheel, and its contents were spilling into the dirt. Crates of what looked like preserves and jarred goods were tumbling out, and a woman in a simple blue dress was trying desperately to catch them before they shattered. Her dark hair was coming loose from its pins, and even from a distance, Garrett could see the distress on her face. No one else seemed to be helping her. Men walked past with barely a glance, and the wagon driver was cursing as he examined his broken wheel. Something in Garrett stirred, the part of him that his mother had raised to be decent, and before he could talk himself out of it, he was striding toward the wagon. "Let me help," he said quietly, keeping his head angled so his hat shielded his face. He began gathering the fallen jars, checking each one for cracks before setting them carefully in an empty crate. The woman looked up, and Garrett caught a glimpse of green eyes that reminded him of spring grass after rain. "Thank you," she breathed, relief evident in her voice. "I thought I would lose everything. These are for the restaurant, and I cannot afford to replace them." Her voice had a slight tremor to it, but also a strength underneath. Garrett kept working, acutely aware of her presence beside him as they rescued jar after jar. She smelled like cinnamon and vanilla, and he wondered if she had been baking. When their hands accidentally touched reaching for the same jar, he pulled back as if burned, which was ironic considering the actual burns hidden beneath his sleeve. "I am Delilah Fairfield," she said as they worked. "My father owns the ranch outside town, and I run a small restaurant here. These preserves are from our kitchen." Fairfield, the name of the ranch where he was seeking work. Garrett hesitated, then figured there was no harm in introducing himself since he would likely see her again anyway. "Garrett Xavier, I was heading to your father's ranch to inquire about work." "Oh." Delilah straightened up, pushing a strand of dark hair from her face. She was pretty, Garrett realized, with delicate features and a determined set to her jaw. Father did mention he was looking for help. The last 2 hands left for the goldfields, chasing dreams of easy money. "No such thing," Garrett muttered, and Delilah laughed, a sound that reminded him of wind chimes. "No, there is not," she agreed, but try telling young men that when they have gold fever. They finished gathering the preserves, and the wagon driver finally managed to get the attention of a man with a spare wheel. Delilah wiped her hands on her apron and looked at Garrett directly for the first time. He instinctively turned his head, keeping his scarred side in shadow. "Would you mind helping me carry these to the restaurant?" she asked. "It is just 2 buildings down, and then I can give you directions to the ranch. Father will be there this evening." Garrett wanted to refuse, wanted to keep moving before she saw too much, but those green eyes held a genuine warmth that he had not encountered in a long time. "All right," he heard himself say. They carried the crates between them, and Delilah led him to a small building with a hand-painted sign that read, "Delilah's Table." The interior was clean and bright, with checkered curtains at the windows and tables covered in simple white cloths. It smelled like fresh bread and roasting meat, and Garrett's stomach reminded him that he had not eaten since dawn. "You must be hungry," Delilah said, noticing his glance toward the kitchen. "Please, let me give you a meal as thanks for your help. It is the least I can do." "That is not necessary," Garrett started, but she was already disappearing into the kitchen. "Sit," she called back. "I will not take no for an answer." Garrett looked around the empty restaurant and chose a table in the corner where the light would not reach his face easily. He kept his hat on, angled low, and waited. The sounds and smells from the kitchen made him nostalgic for his mother's cooking, for the ranch house that no longer existed except in his memories. Delilah emerged with a plate piled high with roast beef, potatoes, green beans, and thick slices of bread still warm from the oven. She set it in front of him along with a cup of coffee, then surprised him by sitting down across from him with her own cup. "I hope you do not mind the company," she said. "I have been cooking all morning, and it is nice to have someone to talk to." Garrett did mind, actually, because it meant she would be looking at him while he ate, but he could not find the words to say so without being rude. He picked up his fork and began eating, keeping his movements careful and his head angled. "Have you been in California long?" Delilah asked, wrapping her hands around her coffee cup. "Just arrived," Garrett said shortly, hoping brevity would discourage conversation. "Where are you from originally?" "Wyoming." "That is quite a journey. What brought you to California?" Garrett set down his fork, the food suddenly tasting like ash. "Just looking for work." Something in his tone must have communicated that this line of questioning was unwelcome, because Delilah fell silent for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice was softer. "I apologize. My father always says I ask too many questions. It is a terrible habit." "It is fine," Garrett said, feeling guilty for his curtness. "I am just not much for talking." "That is all right," Delilah said, and she sounded like she meant it. "Eat your meal. You look like you need it." They sat in companionable silence while Garrett finished his plate. The food was excellent, better than anything he had tasted in years of eating trail rations, and whatever he could hunt. When he was done, Delilah gave him detailed directions to the Fairfield ranch, drawing a small map on a piece of paper. "Tell Father that I sent you," she said as he stood to leave. "That will count in your favor." "Thank you for the meal," Garrett said, meaning it. "Thank you for your help with the wagon," Delilah replied. She walked him to the door, and as he passed through, she added, "I hope my father hires you. Good men are hard to find." Garrett did not know what to say to that, so he simply tipped his hat, careful to keep it low, and stepped back out into the bright afternoon sun. The ride to the Fairfield ranch took about 30 minutes, following a well-worn road that cut through rolling hills dotted with oak trees. The land was prettier than Garrett had expected, greener than the stories he had heard about California. He could see cattle grazing in distant pastures, and as he drew closer to the main house, He noted that the property was well maintained. The fences were in good repair, the barn looked solid, and the house itself was a large two-story structure with a wide porch that wrapped around the front and side. A man was standing on that porch as Garrett rode up, a tall figure with graying hair and the weathered look of someone who had spent his life working the land. This had to be Delilah's father. Garrett could see the resemblance in the set of the jaw and the direct way he held himself. "Help you?" The man called out as Garrett dismounted. "I am looking for work," Garrett said, keeping his distance and his hat low. "Your daughter Delilah mentioned you might be hiring." The man's expression shifted at the mention of his daughter, becoming slightly less guarded. "You met Delilah?" "Helped her with some trouble in town," Garrett said simply. "She fed me and told me to come here." "Well, if Delilah vouches for you, that is worth something," the man said, coming down the porch steps. "I am Douglas Fairfield. What is your name?" "Garrett Xavier." "You have ranching experience, Mr. Xavier. Grew up on a ranch in Wyoming. Worked cattle most of my life." "Why did you leave Wyoming?" Garrett had prepared for this question. "Ranch burned down. Lost everything. Been drifting since, looking for a place to start over." It was the truth, or at least most of it. Douglas Fairfield studied him for a long moment, and Garrett had the uncomfortable feeling that the older man could see more than he wanted to reveal. But then Douglas nodded. "I need someone who can work hard and handle cattle. I have about 200 head, and I am looking to expand. The work is sunrise to sunset most days, sometimes longer during calving season or when we move the herd. I pay $30 a month plus room and board. You will bunk in the ranch hand quarters behind the barn. Meals are provided 3 a day." "That sounds fair," Garrett said. "Can you start tomorrow?" "I can start now if you need me." Douglas Fairfield smiled for the first time. "I like your attitude. All right, let me show you where you will be staying and then you can settle in. Tomorrow I will introduce you to the rest of the operation." The ranch hand quarters were basic but clean, a small cabin with 2 beds, a table, a stove, and not much else. One bed was clearly in use, with personal items on the small shelf beside it, and Douglas explained that the other ranch hand, a man named Tom Porter, was out with the cattle but would be back by nightfall. "Tom is a good worker," Douglas said. "Been with me for 5 years. He will show you the ropes tomorrow." After Douglas left, Garrett unpacked his few belongings, which did not take long since he traveled light. His saddle and gear he stored in the barn, making sure his horse was properly settled in one of the stalls with fresh water and feed. Then he returned to the cabin and sat on the edge of his bed, feeling the weight of the day settling over him. For the first time in 3 years, he was going to stay somewhere longer than a few weeks. The thought scared him more than it should have. Staying meant people would start to know him, to ask questions, to eventually see what he kept hidden beneath his hat. But he was tired of running, tired of never settling, tired of the loneliness that had become his constant companion. He touched the scars on his face, tracing the ridged skin that still hurt sometimes when the weather changed. The doctors had told him he was lucky to be alive, that burns that severe often killed a man from infection, if not from the initial trauma. Garrett had not felt lucky. He had felt cursed, marked as a survivor when he should have died with his family. A sound outside drew his attention, and he moved to the window to see a rider approaching. This must be Tom Porter. Garrett watched as a lean man in his 40s dismounted and began unsaddling his horse. He had the economical movements of someone who had done the same task thousands of times, and Garrett felt a kinship with him immediately. He went outside to introduce himself, keeping his usual precautions. Tom turned out to be a man of few words himself, which suited Garrett fine. They shook hands, Tom gave him a quick assessment with sharp eyes that missed nothing, and then nodded as if Garrett had passed some internal test. "Supper is up at the main house in an hour," Tom said. "Mrs. Chen cooks for us. She is Douglas's housekeeper and the best cook in 3 counties. "I already ate," Garrett said quickly, not wanting to sit through a meal where people could look at him. Tom shrugged. "Suit yourself, but you will regret it when you smell her cooking." True to Tom's word, an hour later, the scents drifting from the main house were incredible. Garrett's earlier meal had worn off, and his stomach was starting to protest. He tried to ignore it, but when Tom came back from supper carrying a plate covered with a cloth, Garrett knew he had been found out. "Mrs. Chen insisted," Tom said, handing over the plate. "Said no man goes to bed hungry on this ranch." The plate contained fried chicken, mashed potatoes swimming in gravy, corn, and biscuits. Garrett accepted it with a muttered thanks, and Tom left him alone to eat in the privacy of the cabin. As he ate, Garrett realized that this place might be different from the others he had drifted through. There was a sense of community here, of people looking out for each other, that reminded him painfully of what he had lost. The next morning, Garrett woke before dawn, a habit from his childhood that had never left him. He dressed quickly, splashed cold water on his face from the basin, and made sure his hat was firmly in place before stepping outside. Tom was already up, and together they headed to the barn to begin the morning feeding. Douglas appeared as they were finishing, and he spent the next several hours showing Garrett the property. The Fairfield ranch was impressive, with grazing land that stretched for miles, a good water source from a creek that ran through the property, and cattle that looked healthy and well tended. Douglas clearly knew his business, and he spoke about his plans for expansion with the kind of passion that reminded Garrett of his own father. By mid-morning, Garrett was checking fence line in the northern pasture when he saw a rider approaching. He recognized the horse first, a pretty chestnut mare, and then the rider. Delilah Fairfield sat her horse like someone who had been riding since childhood, her dark hair braided down her back, wearing split riding skirts and a practical shirt. She carried saddlebags that looked heavy. "Good morning," she called out as she drew near. "Father told me he hired you. I am glad." Garrett touched his hat in greeting, acutely aware that the morning sun was bright and his hat might not hide as much as he wanted. "Miss Fairfield." "Please, just Delilah," she said, dismounting. "Everyone calls me that." She pulled a wrapped bundle from her saddlebags and held it out to him. "I brought lunch. Mrs. Chen mentioned you skipped supper last night, and I thought you might appreciate something to eat while you are out working." Garrett hesitated, uncomfortable with the kindness. "You did not have to do that." "I know," Delilah said simply, "but I wanted to. Consider it a welcome to the ranch." She handed him the bundle, and their fingers brushed again just as they had the day before. This time, Garrett did not pull away quite so quickly. He looked at her, really looked at her for the first time, and saw genuine warmth in her green eyes. No pity, no calculation, just simple human kindness. "Thank you," he said, and meant it. Delilah smiled, and Garrett felt something in his chest tighten. "How are you settling in?" "Fine." "Your father runs a good operation." "He does," Delilah agreed. "He loves this ranch more than anything. Well, except for me and my brother, but Samuel is back east at university, so it is just father and me now." "Your mother?" Garrett asked, then immediately regretted the question. He of all people should know better than to ask about missing family members, but Delilah did not seem offended. "She died when I was 12. Fever took her one winter. It has been just the 3 of us since then, and now with Samuel gone, it feels empty sometimes." "I am sorry," Garrett said quietly. "Thank you." Delilah looked out over the pasture, her expression distant. "That is part of why I started the restaurant in town. I love cooking and I wanted something that was mine, something I built myself. Father understands, even though he worries about me being in town alone. It is dangerous for a woman alone, Garrett said before he could stop himself. Delilah's eyes flashed with amusement. I can handle myself, Mr. Xavier. I have been running that restaurant for 2 years now, and I have not had any trouble I could not manage. Still, Garrett persisted, surprising himself with his concern. Men can be unpredictable. Then it is fortunate there are men like you who help women with broken wagons, Delilah said softly. The world needs more of that. Garrett did not know what to say to that, so he simply held up the bundle of food. Thank you for this. You are welcome. Delilah mounted her horse with easy grace. I bring lunch out to the hands every few days, so you will see me around. She rode off before Garrett could process what that meant, and he was left standing in the pasture with her gift in his hands, and a confusion of feelings he had not experienced in 3 years. He told himself it was just surprise at her kindness, nothing more. He had no business feeling anything else, not with his face the way it was, not with the guilt he still carried. But when he opened the bundle and found fried chicken sandwiches, fresh fruit, and cookies that tasted like heaven, he could not help but think of Delilah's smile. The days fell into a rhythm. Garrett worked from dawn until dusk, helping Tom move cattle, repair fences, clear brush, and do the 1,000 other tasks that kept a ranch running. He discovered that Tom was good company despite being quiet, sharing Garrett's preference for letting silence speak when words were not needed. Douglas was a fair boss who worked alongside his hands rather than simply giving orders, and Garrett respected that. Mrs. Chen, the housekeeper, was a Chinese woman in her 50s who had come to California during the gold rush with her husband. When he died in a mining accident, Douglas had hired her to help run his household, and she had been with the family ever since. She insisted on feeding Garrett properly, often sending extra food to the cabin with Tom or leaving plates on the porch when she knew Garrett was avoiding the main house. And then there was Delilah. True to her word, she appeared every few days with food, always with a warm greeting and a smile that made Garrett's heart do strange things. She never pushed him to talk, never tried to see beneath his hat, just treated him with a gentle kindness that was slowly dismantling the walls he had built around himself. A month into his employment, Garrett was working in the barn when Delilah arrived with her usual saddlebags. But this time, something was wrong. Her face was pale and she dismounted with less than her usual grace. "Are you all right?" Garrett asked, approaching her carefully. "Just a bit dizzy," Delilah admitted. "I think I may have worked too hard in the heat today." The restaurant was busy and I did not take time to eat or drink enough water. She swayed as she spoke, and Garrett moved without thinking, catching her elbow to steady her. "You need to sit down. Come on." He led her into the barn where it was cooler and settled her on a hay bale. She leaned back against the wall, closing her eyes and breathing deeply. Garrett fetched water from the pump outside and brought it to her, watching anxiously as she drank. "Thank you," she murmured. "I feel foolish." "You feel human," Garrett corrected. "Everyone pushes too hard sometimes." Delilah opened her eyes and looked at him, and Garrett realized with a start that he had positioned himself without thinking, kneeling beside her in a way that put them at eye level. The barn was dim, but not dark enough to hide him completely. He started to turn his head, but Delilah's hand came up, gentle and slow. "May I?" she asked softly. Garrett froze. He knew what she was asking. Every instinct screamed at him to pull away, to retreat into the safety of shadows and distance. But something in her eyes, something warm and accepting, held him still. Her fingers touched the brim of his hat, and then slowly, carefully, she pushed it back. The late afternoon light filtering through the barn's cracks fell across his face, illuminating the scars that he had kept hidden. Garrett watched her expression, waiting for the inevitable recoil, the pity, the disgust. Instead, Delilah's fingers moved from his hat to his face, tracing the scarred skin with a feather-light touch that made him shiver. Her expression was gentle, sad perhaps, but not repulsed. "What happened?" she asked quietly. "Fire," Garrett managed, his voice rough. "3 years ago, my family's ranch burned. I tried to save them, but I was too late." "You lost them all." Her fingers had not left his face, still touching him with that incredible gentleness. "My mother, father, younger brother. All gone." "I am so sorry," Delilah whispered, and there were tears in her green eyes. Not for his scars, he realized, but for his loss. That must have been unbearable. "It was," Garrett admitted, and felt something crack open inside him, some tightly held space where he had locked away all his grief and guilt. "I should have been there. If I had just stayed at the house that night instead of checking the far fences, maybe I could have gotten them out." "Or maybe you would have died with them," Delilah said firmly. "You cannot know what would have happened, Garrett. All you can know is that you tried, and that makes you brave, not guilty." No one had ever said that to him before. The few people who knew his story had offered useless platitudes about God's will or told him he was lucky to have survived. But Delilah saw the truth of it, the survivor's guilt that ate at him, and she was challenging it directly. "I do not feel brave," he said. "I feel marked, cursed." "You are not cursed," Delilah said, and her hand cupped his scarred cheek with such tenderness that Garrett felt his eyes sting. "You are a survivor. There is a difference." They stayed like that for a long moment, her hand on his face, his eyes locked with hers. Something was happening between them, something Garrett had not allowed himself to feel in 3 years. It terrified him and thrilled him in equal measure. "I should go," Delilah finally said, but she sounded reluctant. "Father will wonder where I am. You are feeling better?" Garrett asked, not wanting her to leave but knowing she should. "Much better, thank you." She stood up, and Garrett stood with her, pulling his hat back down into its familiar position. Delilah watched him do it with an expression he could not quite read. "You do not have to hide from me, you know." "I know," Garrett said, though he was not sure he believed it. "Thank you for not looking away." "Why would I look away?" Delilah asked, genuine confusion in her voice. "You are still the same kind man who helped me with my wagon, who works hard for my father, who kneels beside dizzy women to make sure they are all right. Your face does not change any of that." With those words, she left the barn, taking her saddlebags and her lunch offerings with her. Garrett stood in the dim space for a long time after she was gone, his hand touching the scars on his face, thinking about the way she had touched them without flinching. That night, for the first time since the fire, Garrett dreamed of something other than flames and death. He dreamed of green eyes and gentle hands, and he woke feeling something dangerous stirring in his chest. Hope. The next week, Garrett found himself looking for excuses to be near the house when Delilah visited, or to ride into town on errands that would take him past her restaurant. He told himself he was just being practical, that someone should keep an eye on her since Douglas was often busy with ranch work. But the truth was simpler and more complicated. He wanted to see her. Delilah seemed to welcome his presence, always greeting him with that warm smile, always finding time to talk even when her restaurant was busy. They discovered they had much in common beyond their shared losses. Both loved the land and the work it required. Both valued honesty and hard work over empty promises. Both had dreams they had pushed aside in the wake of tragedy, but were slowly beginning to remember. One evening in late July, Garrett was in town picking up supplies when he heard raised voices from Delilah's restaurant. He was inside before he consciously decided to move, his hand instinctively going to his hip, where he used to wear a gun before he decided weapons brought more trouble than they prevented. Inside, a drunk miner was harassing Delilah, who stood behind her counter with a rolling pin in one hand and fire in her eyes. "I said get out," she was telling the man firmly. "You are drunk, and I do not serve drunks." "I got money," the miner slurred, weaving on his feet. "You will serve me if I say so." "The lady said no," Garrett said quietly from the doorway. "Time for you to leave." The miner turned, squinting at Garrett with bleary eyes. "This your woman?" "I am no one's woman," Delilah said sharply, "but Mr. Xavier is right. You need to leave." The miner looked between them, calculating whether 2-on-1 odds were worth the fight. Apparently, he decided they were not because he muttered something under his breath and stumbled out into the street. Garrett watched him go, making sure he really left, before turning back to Delilah. "Are you all right?" "I am fine," Delilah said, setting down her rolling pin with hands that shook slightly. "Thank you for the assistance, though I had the situation handled." "I know you did," Garrett said, and he meant it. She had looked fierce standing there, ready to defend herself and her business. "That does not mean you should have to handle it alone." Delilah's expression softened. "That is the second time you have helped me. I am starting to think you have appointed yourself my protector." "Would that be so bad?" The words came out before Garrett could stop them, and he felt his face heat beneath the scars. "No," Delilah said softly, stepping out from behind her counter. "It would not be bad at all. In fact, I quite like the idea." The restaurant was empty except for the two of them, the dinner rush over and the evening crowd not yet arrived. Delilah moved closer to Garrett, and he found himself unable to step back, unwilling to put distance between them despite his usual caution. "I have been thinking," Delilah said, looking up at him with those green eyes that saw too much. "There is a church social next Saturday, a dance and dinner. Would you consider going with me?" Garrett's first instinct was to refuse. A dance meant people, light, scrutiny. It meant being seen. But it also meant an evening with Delilah, a chance to be something other than the scared ranch hand who hid his face. "I am not much of a dancer," he said instead of refusing outright. "Neither am I," Delilah admitted with a laugh. "But it might be nice to try together." "People will stare," Garrett warned, touching his hat unconsciously. "Let them," Delilah said fiercely. "I do not care what anyone thinks. I want to go with you, Garrett Xavier, scars and all. If you want to go with me." Did he want that? Yes, Garrett realized. He wanted it more than he had wanted anything in 3 years. He wanted to walk into that church hall with Delilah on his arm. He wanted to dance with her despite his lack of skill. He wanted to stop hiding, at least from her. "All right," he heard himself say. "I will go with you." Delilah's smile could have lit up the whole town. "Really, really," Garrett confirmed and felt his own lips curve into an answering smile, something that felt strange and wonderful after so long. "Saturday evening then," Delilah said. "I will close the restaurant early and you can pick me up here." "Saturday evening," Garrett agreed. He left the restaurant walking on air, barely noticing the people on the street or the setting sun painting the sky in shades of orange and red. For the first time since the fire, he was looking forward to something instead of just enduring. It felt like waking up after a long, dark sleep. Tom noticed the change in him immediately. "You are whistling," he observed the next morning as they worked. "I did not know you knew how." "I did not either," Garrett admitted. "This have anything to do with Miss Delilah?" Tom asked with the bluntness of someone who had earned the right. Garrett considered denying it, then decided there was no point. "I am taking her to the church social on Saturday." Tom grinned, the first real grin Garrett had seen from the usually stoic man. "About time. That girl has been sweet on you since you arrived." "She has," Garrett was genuinely surprised. "Everyone can see it except apparently you," Tom said. "The way she lights up when you are around, the way she always finds excuses to bring food out here, the way she looks at you. If you had not asked her to that dance soon, I was going to do it for you." Garrett shook his head, amazed and terrified in equal measure. Delilah Fairfield was sweet on him. The thought filled him with a joy so intense it was almost painful. It also filled him with fear because joy could be lost, people could be taken away, and he did not know if he could survive losing someone else he cared about. But Delilah's words came back to him. "You are a survivor. There is a difference. Maybe it was time to start living like one instead of just existing." Saturday arrived with clear skies and warm temperatures that promised a perfect evening. Garrett spent more time than he wanted to admit getting ready, washing thoroughly, trimming his beard, putting on his cleanest shirt. Tom watched the preparations with poorly concealed amusement but said nothing, for which Garrett was grateful. When Garrett rode into town that evening, the sun was just beginning to set, painting everything in golden light. He tied his horse outside Delilah's restaurant and climbed the steps with his heart pounding harder than it should for a simple social event. Delilah must have been watching for him because the door opened before he could knock. She stood framed in the doorway, wearing a green dress that matched her eyes, her dark hair swept up in a style that left a few curls framing her face. She was beautiful, and Garrett forgot to breathe for a moment. "Hello," Delilah said softly, her own eyes traveling over him with clear appreciation. "You look very handsome." "So do you," Garrett managed. "Beautiful, I mean. You look beautiful." Delilah's smile was radiant as she locked up the restaurant and took his offered arm. They walked together toward the church at the end of the street, where lanterns were already being lit, and the sounds of a fiddle warming up drifted through the open doors. Other couples and families were making their way there as well, and Garrett felt his anxiety spike as people turned to look at them. He knew what they saw. A scarred man and a beautiful woman, an unlikely pairing that would fuel gossip for weeks. He almost turned around, almost made an excuse to leave, but then Delilah's hand tightened on his arm. "I am proud to be here with you," she said quietly, as if reading his thoughts. "Do not let them take this from us." Us. Such a small word, but it steadied Garrett like nothing else could. He straightened his shoulders and walked with her into the church hall, keeping his hat on but his head up. The interior was decorated with wildflowers and ribbons, tables laden with food against one wall, and an open space in the center where people could dance. The fiddle player had been joined by someone on a guitar, and they were playing a lively tune that had several couples already moving through the steps. Delilah Fairfield was there with Mrs. Chen, who had been persuaded to attend as his companion. He caught sight of Garrett and Delilah, and his face registered surprise, then something that looked like approval. He made his way through the crowd to greet them. "Mr. Xavier," he said, shaking Garrett's hand, "I am glad to see you here, and Delilah, you look lovely." "Thank you, Father," Delilah said, kissing his cheek. "Take care of my daughter," Douglas said to Garrett, but there was no threat in his tone, only a father's natural protectiveness. "I will," Garrett promised. Other people came up to say hello to Delilah, and she introduced Garrett each time with such genuine pleasure that his anxiety began to ease. Yes, there were stares. Yes, he caught a few whispers. But there was also acceptance from most, and the few who looked at him with judgment or pity were easily ignored when Delilah was beside him, her hand warm in his. When the band struck up a waltz, Delilah turned to him with expectation in her eyes. "Shall we?" Garrett's mouth went dry. "I told you I am not much of a dancer." "And I told you neither am I," Delilah reminded him. "But that does not matter. Come on." She led him onto the floor before he could protest further, and then she was placing his hand at her waist, taking his other hand in hers, and they were moving. Garrett did know the basic steps, muscle memory from a youth that felt like a lifetime ago. And after a few awkward moments, he and Delilah found their rhythm. Dancing with her was nothing like he remembered from the few times he had danced before the fire. This felt intimate and perfect, her body moving with his, her green eyes locked on his face with an expression that made his heart race. The rest of the room faded away until there was only Delilah and the music and the feeling of her in his arms. "See," she said softly, "you are a wonderful dancer." "Only because you are a wonderful partner," Garrett replied, and was rewarded with another of those brilliant smiles. They danced 3 more songs, taking breaks to cool off with punch and to talk with the other attendees. Garrett found himself genuinely enjoying the evening, laughing at Tom's dry observations when the other ranch hand appeared with a plate of food, listening to Mrs. Chen tell stories about the early days of the ranch, even engaging in conversation with some of the townspeople who approached them. As the evening wore on and the crowd thinned, Garrett and Delilah found themselves outside on the church steps, seeking cooler air and a moment of relative privacy. The stars were out in force, brilliant points of light in the clear California sky. Garrett had removed his hat at some point during the evening, and now he held it in his hands, no longer feeling the need to hide. "Thank you for tonight," Delilah said, leaning against the railing. "I had a wonderful time." "So did I," Garrett admitted. "I cannot remember the last time I enjoyed myself so much." "Not since before the fire?" Delilah asked gently. Garrett considered, then nodded. "Yes, it feels like a betrayal sometimes, being happy when they are gone." "They would want you to be happy," Delilah said with certainty. "If they loved you, and I am sure they did, they would want you to live a full life, not spend it punishing yourself for surviving." "How did you get so wise?" Garrett asked, only half joking. "I learned it the hard way, same as you," Delilah replied. "When my mother died, I was so angry. Angry at her for leaving us, angry at God for taking her, angry at myself for not being able to save her. I spent years with that anger eating me from the inside until I realized something important." "What was that?" "That honoring her memory did not mean suffering. It meant living well, living fully, becoming the person she raised me to be. So I opened my restaurant, I learned to smile again, I let myself hope for the future. And she would be proud of that, I think." Garrett reached out without thinking, taking Delilah's hand in his. "She would be proud of you. How could she not be?" Delilah looked down at their joined hands, then back up at his face. The light from the church windows illuminated them both, and Garrett saw his own hope reflected in her eyes. "Can I tell you something?" she asked. "Anything." "I think I am falling in love with you, Garrett Xavier." The words hung in the air between them, fragile and terrifying and more precious than anything Garrett had ever received. He wanted to say it back, wanted to tell her that he had been falling for her since that first moment she reached up to touch his scars, but fear closed his throat. What if he lost her like he lost his family? What if caring about her put her in danger somehow? What if he was not enough, damaged as he was? But looking into Delilah's eyes, seeing the vulnerability and courage it had taken for her to speak first, Garrett found his own courage. "I think I am falling in love with you too," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "It terrifies me, but it is the truth." "Good," Delilah said, and then she was rising on her toes, her hands coming up to frame his face, both sides, scars and all, and she was kissing him. It was a gentle kiss, sweet and exploratory, and it sent electricity through every nerve in Garrett's body. He pulled her closer, one hand at her waist, the other cupping the back of her head, and kissed her back with 3 years of loneliness and longing pouring into the gesture. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Garrett rested his forehead against hers. "I want to do this right," he said. "Court you properly, ask your father for permission, all of it." "My father already approves," Delilah said with a soft laugh. "Why do you think he was smiling so much tonight? But yes, I want that too. I want everything with you, Garrett, all the time we can have." They stood together under the stars, holding each other, both marveling at the unexpected gift they had found. Inside the church, the music played on, but out here in the quiet night, they had their own perfect melody. The courtship that followed was both traditional and uniquely theirs. Garrett spoke to Douglas the next day, hat in hand, and asked for permission to court his daughter officially. Douglas had looked at him with sharp eyes that saw everything, then nodded and shook his hand. "I hoped it would be you," Douglas admitted. "You are a good man, Garrett Xavier. You work hard, you are honest, and my daughter is happy when she is with you. That is all I can ask for." With Douglas's blessing, Garrett and Delilah spent their free time together whenever possible. Garrett would ride into town on his days off, and they would walk together, talking about everything and nothing. Delilah taught him how to make some of her recipes, laughing when he burned the bread but praising when he mastered her grandmother's stew. Garrett took her riding through the prettiest parts of the ranch, showing her hidden meadows and teaching her to track deer. They attended more socials together, becoming an established couple in the community's eyes. The stares and whispers gradually faded as people grew accustomed to seeing them together, and Garrett found himself caring less and less what others thought. Delilah's acceptance had opened a door, and through it, he discovered that most people were kinder than he had given them credit for. Some still looked at his scars with pity or discomfort, but many simply saw him as Tom's partner on the ranch, or Delilah's sweetheart, or the man who helped Mrs. Chen fix her wagon wheel when it broke. Summer gave way to fall, and the ranch work shifted to preparing for winter. Garrett worked long hours helping Douglas bring in the hay, repair the barn roof, and make sure the cattle had adequate shelter for the coming cold months. It was satisfying work, the kind that left him exhausted but content at the end of each day. On a crisp October evening, Garrett was working late in the barn when Delilah arrived with dinner. This had become a routine between them, her bringing food when he could not leave the ranch, staying to eat with him and talk about their days. Tonight, she had made his favorite chicken pot pie, and they sat together in the hay loft eating and watching the sun set through the open doors. "I have been thinking," Delilah said, setting down her empty plate, "about the future." Garrett's heart sped up. They had not talked specifically about marriage yet, though it was clearly where their relationship was heading. "What about it?" "I want to spend it with you," Delilah said simply. "I know we have only been courting for a few months, but I am certain of my feelings. You are the man I want beside me for all my days, Garrett. I want to wake up next to you and fall asleep in your arms. I want to build a life together, maybe have children someday. I want everything with you." Garrett set his own plate aside and took her hands in his. "I want that too. More than I can say. But Delilah, you need to be certain. I come with nightmares and scars and grief that may never fully heal. I cannot promise you an easy life." "I do not want an easy life," Delilah said fiercely. "I want a real life with all its joys and struggles shared with someone I love." "That is you, Garrett. It has only ever been you." "Then marry me," Garrett said, the words coming from somewhere deep and true. "I do not have a ring yet, and this is not the romantic proposal you deserve, but I cannot wait another moment. Marry me, Delilah Fairfield. Make me the happiest man alive." Delilah's answer was to throw her arms around his neck and kiss him soundly. "Yes," she said between kisses. "Yes, yes, yes." They held each other in the hay loft as the sun completed its descent and the stars began to emerge, planning their future in excited whispers. They would marry before winter set in fully, a small ceremony at the church with their friends and family. Delilah would continue running her restaurant, at least for now, and Garrett would keep working the ranch. They would save money to eventually buy their own place, maybe expand Delilah's business or increase their own herd. There were so many possibilities ahead of them, so many dreams to chase together. The next morning, Garrett rode into Jamestown and visited the jeweler, using money he had been carefully saving since he started working for Douglas. He chose a simple gold band with a small emerald that reminded him of Delilah's eyes. It was not fancy, but it was honest and beautiful, just like the woman he was giving it to. That evening he proposed again properly, on one knee in her restaurant after she closed, presenting the ring with hands that shook slightly. Delilah cried as she said yes again, and the ring fit perfectly when Garrett slid it onto her finger. The next weeks were a flurry of preparation. Mrs. Chen took charge of the wedding plans with an efficiency that left everyone else spinning, but she did so with such evident joy that no one minded being ordered around. Delilah made her own wedding dress, a simple but elegant gown in cream-colored silk, and Garrett bought his first new suit in years. Tom agreed to stand up with Garrett as his best man, and Delilah asked Mrs. Chen to stand with her. Douglas would walk his daughter down the aisle, and the local minister would perform the ceremony. It would be small and intimate, exactly what both Garrett and Delilah wanted. The night before the wedding, Douglas asked Garrett to join him for a drink on the ranch house porch. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the stars and listening to the sounds of the ranch settling down for the night. Finally, Douglas spoke. "You know, when Delilah was born, I held her in my arms and thought about the man she would someday marry. I wondered what kind of person would be worthy of her, what qualities he would need to make her happy." Garrett listened, not sure where this was going. "I decided he would need to be strong but gentle, hardworking but kind, honest above all else. Someone who had known loss and thus understood how precious love is. Someone who would see her for who she truly is and love her not despite her independence, but because of it." Douglas turned to look at Garrett directly. "You are that man, Garrett Xavier. You are exactly who I hoped for, even if you came in a package I did not expect. I am honored to call you my son." Garrett felt his throat tighten with emotion. He had lost his own father in the fire, and while nothing could replace that, Douglas's words meant more than he could express. "Thank you, sir. I will spend every day trying to be worthy of her." "You already are," Douglas said firmly. "Now get some rest. Tomorrow is going to be the best day of your life." Douglas was right. The wedding day dawned clear and cold, a perfect November morning with frost sparkling on the grass, and the sky so blue it hurt to look at. Garrett dressed carefully in his new suit, his hands steady despite his nerves. Tom helped him with his tie, making jokes to ease the tension, and then it was time to go to the church. The small building was decorated with late-season wildflowers and ribbons, candles providing warm light in the chill air. The pews were filled with ranch hands, townspeople, and the few friends they had invited. Garrett took his place at the front with Tom beside him, and then the music started. Mrs. Chen came down the aisle first, dignified and proud, taking her place opposite Tom. And then Delilah appeared on her father's arm, and Garrett forgot how to breathe. She was radiant, her dark hair swept up with flowers woven through it, her green eyes locked on Garrett's face with such love that he felt tears prick his own eyes. The cream-colored dress fit her perfectly, and she carried a small bouquet of roses that Douglas must have ordered specially. Douglas walked her down the aisle, and when they reached Garrett, he placed Delilah's hand in Garrett's with a nod that conveyed trust and blessing. Then Douglas stepped back, and it was just Garrett and Delilah standing before the minister. The ceremony itself passed in a blur of emotion. Garrett heard himself making vows, promising to love and honor and cherish Delilah for all his days. He heard Delilah's voice, steady and clear, making the same promises back to him. He felt the ring slide onto his own finger, a matching gold band to the one he had given her. And then the minister was pronouncing them husband and wife, and Garrett was kissing Delilah as their friends and family erupted in applause. They walked back down the aisle together, married, united, beginning their new life as one. Outside the church, people threw rice and offered congratulations. Douglas embraced them both with tears in his eyes. Mrs. Chen fussed over Delilah's dress. Tom shook Garrett's hand with a grin that said he had known this would happen all along. The reception was held at Delilah's restaurant, which had been closed for the day and transformed into a celebration space. There was music and dancing, food and laughter, toasts and stories. Garrett danced with his bride multiple times, no longer self-conscious about his scars or his skill, just happy to hold her close. He danced with Mrs. Chen, who scolded him gently for stepping on her toes but smiled the whole time. He even danced with one of the older townswomen who declared him a fine catch and told Delilah she was lucky. As the evening wore on, and the celebration showed no signs of slowing, Garrett and Delilah slipped away. They had decided to spend their wedding night at the ranch house, in a room Douglas had specially prepared for them before leaving to stay with Mrs. Chen in town, giving them privacy. The room was beautiful, with fresh linens on the bed, a fire crackling in the fireplace, and candles providing soft light. Someone, probably Mrs. Chen, had left flowers in a vase on the dresser and a bottle of wine with 2 glasses. Delilah stood in the middle of the room, suddenly looking nervous despite everything they had already shared. Garrett went to her, taking her hands in his. "Are you all right?" "More than all right," Delilah said softly. "I am married to you. I am your wife. It feels like a dream." "If it is, I never want to wake up," Garrett replied and kissed her gently. What followed was tender and passionate, nervous laughter and whispered words of love. They took their time learning each other, Delilah tracing every scar on Garrett's body with loving fingers, Garrett worshiping every inch of his bride. They made love with the sweetness of first times and the knowledge that this was just the beginning of a lifetime together. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the firelight, Delilah's head on Garrett's chest, his arms wrapped securely around her. "I love you," Garrett murmured into her hair. "I will love you until my last breath and beyond." "I love you too," Delilah replied. "Thank you for taking a chance on us, for letting me see past your walls. Thank you for reaching up and brushing aside my hat that day in the barn," Garrett said, "for seeing me when I was sure no one could." "I will always see you," Delilah promised. "The real you, not just the scars or the pain. The good man underneath all that fear. The man I choose every day for the rest of our lives." They fell asleep in each other's arms, content and complete. The months that followed were the happiest of Garrett's life. He and Delilah settled into married life with surprising ease, finding a rhythm that worked for both of them. Delilah continued running her restaurant during the day while Garrett worked the ranch, and their evenings were spent together, cooking dinner, talking about their days, making plans for the future. Douglas officially made Garrett a partner in the ranch come spring, saying that since Garrett was family now, it only made sense for him to have a stake in the property. The 3 of them worked together to expand the operation, buying more cattle and more land, building the ranch into something they could all be proud of. Tom remained Garrett's close friend and working partner, and he began courting one of the women from town, a widow named Margaret who ran the boarding house. Garrett and Delilah attended their wedding the following summer, both of them grinning at how nervous Tom was despite his usual calm demeanor. Mrs. Chen continued to take care of the household and everyone in it, treating Garrett and Delilah like the children she had never had. She taught Delilah more of her special recipes and scolded Garrett when he worked too hard without taking breaks. In the fall of their first year of marriage, Delilah came to Garrett with news that made his heart nearly stop with joy. She was pregnant, expecting their first child in the spring. Garrett held her close, overwhelmed with happiness and terror in equal measure. What if something goes wrong? He asked, all his old fears rising up. What if I lose you like I lost them? You will not lose me, Delilah said firmly. I am strong, and Mrs. Chen will make sure I have the best care. We are going to have this baby, and they are going to be beautiful and perfect because they are ours. She was right. The pregnancy progressed normally, and in April of 1880, Delilah gave birth to a healthy baby girl with dark hair and green eyes just like her mother. They named her Rose after Garrett's mother, and he wept when he held her for the first time, overwhelmed by the perfection of this tiny human they had created. Douglas was a doting grandfather, visiting every day to hold his granddaughter and tell her stories. Mrs. Chen knitted enough baby clothes to outfit 10 infants. Tom brought a hand-carved rattle he had made himself. The whole ranch celebrated the new arrival, and Garrett felt his family expanding in ways he had thought impossible after the fire. Rose was a happy baby who rarely cried and loved being outside. As she grew, she showed signs of being as independent as her mother and as stubborn as her father. Garrett would carry her around the ranch, showing her the horses and cattle, telling her about the land and the work it required. Delilah would sing to her in the evenings, lullabies passed down from her own mother. 2 years later, they had a son they named Daniel after Garrett's father. Daniel was quieter than Rose but no less loved, and watching his children play together filled Garrett with a peace he had never expected to feel again. Delilah eventually sold her restaurant to focus on raising their growing family, though she still cooked for the ranch hands and anyone else who needed feeding. Her kitchen became a gathering place where problems were solved over coffee and fresh bread, where friendships were forged and community was built. The ranch prospered under the partnership of Douglas, Garrett, and eventually Tom, who became a full partner after saving enough from his wages and the success of his own small herd. They weathered droughts and hard winters, celebrated good years and worked through bad ones, but they did it together as a family. When Rose was 5 and Daniel was 3, Delilah became pregnant again, this time with twin boys they named James and John. The 4 children kept them busy and exhausted, but also filled their lives with laughter and love. The ranch house rang with the sounds of playing children, and Garrett often paused in his work to watch them, marveling at how far he had come from that burned and broken man who rode into Jamestown 7 years before. One evening, when the twins were about a year old and the older children were finally asleep after much persuasion, Garrett and Delilah sat together on the porch watching the sunset. It had become their favorite time, these quiet moments stolen between the chaos of raising 4 children and running a ranch. "You ever think about that day in the barn?" Delilah asked, leaning against Garrett's shoulder. "When I pushed back your hat, all the time," Garrett admitted. "It was the bravest thing anyone has ever done for me." "It was not brave," Delilah protested. "It was just seeing you, really seeing you and wanting you to know that was enough." "It was more than enough," Garrett said, kissing the top of her head. "It was everything." "You saved me that day, Delilah. not from the fire, but from the darkness I was living in after it. You gave me back my life." "We saved each other," Delilah corrected gently. "I was lonely too, going through the motions but not really living. You reminded me that taking risks is worth it, that opening your heart is scary but necessary. We found each other exactly when we both needed it most." "I love you," Garrett said, as he did every day, never tired of saying it or hearing it back. "I love you too," Delilah replied, turning to kiss him properly. "Forever and always." They sat together as the sun completed its descent and the first stars appeared, listening to the peaceful sounds of their ranch settling down for the night. Inside the house, their children slept safely in their beds. In the barn, the animals were cared for and content. Across the property, the cattle grazed peacefully under the watchful eye of the night herders. Everything was as it should be. Garrett thought about the fire that had marked him, about the family he had lost, about the 3 years he had spent drifting with no purpose or hope. He thought about the guilt and fear that had nearly consumed him, about how close he had come to giving up entirely. And then he thought about the day he rode into Jamestown, about helping a woman with a broken wagon, about a touch that changed everything. "What are you thinking about?" Delilah asked softly. "How grateful I am," Garrett replied honestly. "For you, for our children, for this life we have built. I never thought I would be happy again, and now I cannot imagine being anything else." "You deserve happiness," Delilah said firmly. "You deserve all the good things that have come to us." "So do you," Garrett replied. "I hope you know that." "I do," Delilah assured him. "Every single day, I know how blessed we are." The years continued to pass, each one bringing new challenges and new joys. The children grew, taking on more responsibilities around the ranch as they got older. Rose proved to be a natural with horses, spending hours in the barn working with the animals. Daniel was quieter but had a head for numbers, eventually taking over the ranch's bookkeeping. The twins were inseparable, always getting into trouble together, but also watching out for each other with fierce loyalty. Douglas lived to see all his grandchildren grow into fine young adults before passing peacefully in his sleep at the age of 72. His loss was deeply felt, but they took comfort in knowing he had spent his final years surrounded by love and family, exactly as he had wanted. Mrs. Chen continued to be a constant presence in their lives until her own passing at the age of 85. Sharp-minded and sharp-tongued until the very end. She left the family, her collection of recipes and her grandmother's jade bracelet, for Rose, telling Delilah it should stay with strong women who knew their own minds. Tom and Margaret had 3 children of their own, and the 2 families remained close, their children growing up together and eventually working together to expand both ranches into a thriving operation that supplied cattle throughout California. Delilah eventually opened another restaurant, this time with Rose as her partner, passing down her knowledge and her love of cooking to her daughter. The restaurant became famous throughout the region, drawing visitors from as far away as San Francisco to taste their legendary pies and roasts. On their 25th wedding anniversary, Garrett surprised Delilah with a trip to San Francisco, their first real vacation since they had married. They spent a week exploring the city, eating at fancy restaurants, attending the theater, and simply enjoying each other's company without the demands of ranch and children. On their last night there, they walked along the waterfront watching the ships in the harbor, and Delilah turned to Garrett with a smile. "Do you know what I love most about our life together?" "What is that?" Garrett asked, pulling her close. "That we built it ourselves from nothing. We took 2 broken people and made something whole and beautiful. We created a family, a home, a legacy, and we did it together, one day at a time." Best decision I ever made, Garrett said, was stopping to help a woman with a broken wagon. Best decision I ever made, Delilah countered, was reaching up and pushing back your hat, seeing the real you underneath. You always see the real me, Garrett said softly, even the parts I try to hide, especially those parts. That is what love is, Delilah replied. Seeing all of someone, the good and the difficult and the scared, and choosing them anyway. Choosing them every single day. They kissed as the sun set over the Pacific, two people who had found each other in the wilderness and built something extraordinary together. The scars on Garrett's face had faded over the years, the angry red smoothing into pale lines that he barely noticed anymore. They were part of him, part of his story, but they no longer defined him. What defined him now was the life he had built with Delilah. The children they had raised, the ranch they had expanded, the community they had helped create. The love they shared that had only grown deeper and stronger with each passing year. The courage it had taken to let someone see his pain, and the grace she had shown in accepting all of him. They returned to the ranch at the end of their trip to find their children had organized a celebration. There was a banner strung across the porch welcoming them home, tables laden with food, and friends and neighbors gathered to mark their anniversary. Rose had baked a towering cake, Daniel had organized games for the younger children, and the twins had apparently spent hours decorating the barn with ribbons and flowers. Surprise! Everyone shouted as Garrett and Delilah stepped down from the wagon, and Garrett felt his eyes mist with happy tears. The party lasted well into the night, with music and dancing and storytelling. Garrett danced with Delilah, of course, but also with each of his children and several of his grandchildren who were now old enough to participate. He danced with Margaret, with Rose, with several of the neighbor women who all declared him much improved from his early days. When the celebration finally wound down and the guests began departing, Garrett and Delilah found themselves back on their favorite spot on the porch, watching the stars just as they had on their wedding night 25 years before. "I think we did all right," Delilah said softly, surveying the ranch that had been her childhood home and was now the center of their family empire. "Your mother and father would be proud of you, Garrett, of the man you became, of the life you built." "Our life," Garrett corrected. "I could not have done any of it without you." "We did it together," Delilah agreed. "And we still have so much ahead of us. Watching our children grow, meeting more grandchildren, maybe even great-grandchildren someday, growing old together." "I look forward to every moment of it," Garrett said honestly. "As long as you are beside me." "Always," Delilah promised. "I will always be beside you," and she was. Through all the years that followed, through the good times and the inevitable challenges that come with life, Delilah was Garrett's constant companion and truest love. They watched their children marry and have children of their own. They celebrated the ranch's 50th anniversary, and then its 60th. They attended more funerals than they liked, but also more weddings and births than they could count. When Garrett was 65 and Delilah was 63, they finally handed over the day-to-day running of the ranch to Rose and her husband, a good man named Robert, who had proved himself worthy of their eldest daughter. They did not retire completely, of course. Garrett could not stay away from the cattle, and Delilah was still cooking for the family gatherings that happened at least once a week. But they slowed down, taking time to travel a bit, to read books they had been meaning to get to simply enjoy each other's company without the constant demands of work. On a warm spring evening in 1915, when Garrett was 70 years old and Delilah was 68, they sat together on their porch as the sun set. It was their ritual, this evening time together, and they had missed it only a handful of times in all their years of marriage. "Do you have any regrets?" Delilah asked, a question she had never posed before. Garrett thought about it seriously, turning the question over in his mind. Did he regret the fire that had scarred him and taken his first family? Of course. Did he regret the years of pain and guilt that had followed? Certainly. But would he change any of it if it meant not meeting Delilah, not having their children, not building this life? No, he said finally. I do not regret anything because it all led me here to you, to this. If I could go back and change things, I might not end up in Jamestown on that particular day. I might not be there when your wagon broke, and then I would have missed out on the greatest adventure of my life. Our life together, Delilah said, smiling. Our life together, Garrett agreed. Every moment of it, even the hard ones, was worth it because we faced them together. I love you, Garrett Xavier, Delilah said, using his full name as she did when she wanted to make sure he heard her. I have loved you from the moment you helped me with those preserves, and I will love you for whatever time we have left and beyond. I love you, Delilah Xavier, Garrett replied, using her married name with the same emphasis. You are my heart, my home, my everything. You took a broken man and made him whole. You gave me a reason to live when I had forgotten how. You are my miracle. They sat together as the stars came out, holding hands like young sweethearts despite their age and all the years between that first meeting and this moment. Around them, the ranch continued its evening routine, animals settling down, lights appearing in windows as families gathered for dinner, the peaceful sounds of a well-run operation winding down for the night. Inside their house, on the mantel above the fireplace, sat photographs documenting their life together. Their wedding day, young and hopeful. The birth of each child, Garrett holding the babies with a mixture of terror and wonder on his face. Family portraits taken on various anniversaries and holidays, the family growing larger each time. More recent pictures of grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren, the newest generation carrying on the legacy. Also on that mantel sat Garrett's hat, the one he had worn when he first arrived in Jamestown, the one Delilah had pushed back to see his face. He had kept it all these years, a reminder of where he had been and how far he had come. Sometimes, usually late at night when he could not sleep, Garrett would take down that hat and hold it, remembering the man he had been and marveling at the man he had become. That man, that scared and scarred cowboy who had hidden beneath his hat, seemed like a stranger now. Garrett could barely recall what it felt like to live in that much darkness, to believe he was too damaged to deserve love or happiness. Delilah had changed all that with one simple gesture, reaching up to brush aside the brim of his hat and seeing him, really seeing him, for the first time. "What are you thinking about?" Delilah asked, the same question she had asked countless times over the years. "That day in the barn," Garrett said, "when you pushed back my hat. Do you remember what I thought in that moment? Tell me," Delilah invited, settling more comfortably against him. "I thought my world was ending," Garrett admitted. "I thought you would see my scars and recoil, that I would see pity or disgust in your eyes, and it would confirm everything I believed about myself, that I was too broken to be loved. But I did not recoil," Delilah said softly. "No, you did not," Garrett agreed. "You touched my face with such gentleness, such acceptance, and you asked what happened. Not because you pitied me, but because you wanted to know me. You wanted to understand, and in that moment something shifted. I started to believe that maybe, just maybe, I deserved a second chance at happiness." "You always deserved it," Delilah said fiercely, even after all these years still passionate about defending him. "You just needed someone to show you that. And you did," Garrett said simply. "You showed me every day with your love, your patience, your faith in me. You built me back up piece by piece until I was whole again." "We built each other up," Delilah corrected. That is what love does. It sees the broken pieces and helps put them back together, stronger than before. They sat in comfortable silence for a while longer, watching the sky darken and the stars grow brighter. The sounds of the ranch at night surrounded them, familiar and comforting. In the distance, they could hear Rose calling her children in for bed, the sound carrying clearly across the property. Closer by, a horse whinnied in the barn, probably Daniel's mare asking for her evening treat. "We should go inside," Delilah finally said, though neither of them moved. "It is getting cold." "A few more minutes," Garrett requested, and Delilah nodded, settling back against him. Those few minutes stretched into an hour as they talked about everything and nothing, remembering moments from their life together, making plans for tomorrow and next week and next year. They talked about Rose's plans to expand the restaurant, about Daniel's youngest daughter who wanted to go to university, about the twins' latest business venture, breeding horses. They talked about their own plans to visit the coast again, maybe take the train all the way to Seattle just to see it. The future still stretched ahead of them, full of possibilities and plans. But they were also content with the present, with this moment right here on their porch together. Everything else, all the accomplishments and the family they had built and the legacy they were leaving, it all came back to this. Two people choosing each other, day after day, year after year, through everything life threw at them. When they finally did go inside, Garrett helped Delilah up the stairs they had climbed together thousands of times. They got ready for bed with the ease of long practice, moving around each other in the familiar dance of a couple who had shared space for decades. When they climbed into bed, Delilah curled into her spot against Garrett's chest, his arm coming around her automatically. "Good night, my love," Delilah murmured, already half asleep. "Good night, darling," Garrett replied, kissing the top of her head. "I love you." "Love you too," Delilah mumbled, and then her breathing deepened into sleep. Garrett lay awake a while longer, as he often did these days, watching the moonlight play across the ceiling and listening to his wife breathe. He thought about the miracle of their life together, about how close he had come to missing it all, if he had not stopped to help that day, if he had not accepted Douglas's job offer, if he had let his fear win and left Jamestown before Delilah could see past his scars. So many moments where things could have gone differently, where he could have chosen isolation over connection, fear over love. But he had not. With Delilah's help, he had chosen to live, to love, to build something beautiful from the ashes of his past. And what a beautiful life it had been. Garrett finally drifted off to sleep with a smile on his face and his wife in his arms. Exactly where he had been for 37 years, and exactly where he planned to be for whatever years remained. The cowboy who had hidden his burned face beneath his hat was long gone, replaced by a man who lived fully in the light, unafraid and deeply, completely loved. The next morning dawned bright and clear, and Garrett woke to find Delilah already up and moving around downstairs. He could smell coffee and bacon, hear her humming as she worked in the kitchen. He took his time getting dressed, his joints a bit stiffer than they used to be, but nothing that would slow him down too much. When he made his way downstairs, he found Delilah had made a full breakfast spread, clearly expecting company. Sure enough, within the hour, their children began arriving with their own families in tow. This was Sunday, the day they all gathered for a family meal, a tradition they had maintained for years. The house filled with noise and laughter as grandchildren ran through the rooms and adults caught up on the week's news. Rose arrived first with Robert and their 4 children. The oldest now married herself with a baby on the way. They brought fresh pies from the restaurant, a tradition Rose had maintained from her mother's early days. Daniel came next with his wife Sarah and their 3 children, carrying account books because even on Sunday, there was always ranch business to discuss. The twins arrived together, as they usually did, with their respective families, arguing good-naturedly about something to do with the horse breeding program they ran together. By the time everyone had arrived, there were over 30 people crowding into the house, and the noise level was almost overwhelming. But Garrett stood in the middle of it all, watching his family interact, and felt nothing but profound gratitude. All of this, had come from that one moment in the barn when Delilah had reached up and seen past his scars to the man underneath. Delilah found him standing there and slipped her hand into his. "What are you thinking?" she asked, having to raise her voice to be heard over the din. "That I am the luckiest man alive," Garrett replied, squeezing her hand. "We are both lucky," Delilah corrected. "To have found each other, to have built this family, to still be here to enjoy it all." "To many more years," Garrett said, raising her hand to kiss her knuckles. "To many more years," Delilah agreed, and they had them. Years more of Sunday dinners and daily ranch work, of quiet evenings on the porch and exciting family celebrations. Years of watching their family continue to grow and thrive, of seeing their legacy take root in new generations. Years of growing old together, their love deepening with each passing season. When Garrett Xavier finally passed away at the age of 82, it was peacefully in his sleep with Delilah beside him, just as he had hoped. The town of Jamestown and the surrounding ranching community mourned the loss of a good man who had been a pillar of their community for over 4 decades. His funeral was attended by hundreds, all coming to pay their respects to the cowboy who had arrived with nothing but hidden scars and left behind a legacy of love, hard work, and family. Delilah lived 6 more years, remaining active and sharp-minded until the very end. She spent those years surrounded by her children and grandchildren, continuing to cook for family gatherings and tell stories about the early days of her marriage to Garrett. When she spoke of him, her eyes would light up the way they had when she was a young woman falling in love for the first time. She passed away on a spring evening, sitting in her favorite rocking chair on the porch watching the sunset, exactly where she and Garrett had spent so many evenings together. They found her there with a smile on her face, and everyone who saw her said she looked peaceful, like she was seeing something wonderful. Her children liked to think that Garrett had come to take her home, that they were together again the way they always should be. They buried Delilah next to Garrett in the family cemetery on the ranch, under the oak tree they had planted on their 10th anniversary. Their headstone was simple, bearing their names and dates and one line that Rose had chosen: 2 hearts, 1 love forever. The ranch continued under the management of their children and grandchildren, thriving through the changing times and remaining a fixture in the community. Delilah's restaurant was still going strong, now run by Rose's daughter with the same recipes and the same commitment to excellence that had made it famous. The family traditions they had established, the Sunday dinners and the evening talks and the emphasis on hard work and compassion, those carried on through the generations. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the sun was setting and the ranch was peaceful, family members sitting on that porch would swear they could feel the presence of Garrett and Delilah, still watching over the home they had built together, still finding peace in each other's company. It was a comforting thought that love like theirs did not simply end but continued on, woven into the very fabric of the place they had created. Because that was the truth at the heart of their story. Love, real love, does not hide from scars or pain. It sees them, acknowledges them, and then chooses to reach out anyway. It pushes back the hat to reveal what is hidden underneath. It touches with gentleness and accepts with grace. It builds and sustains and endures through everything life can throw at it. Garrett Xavier had been a cowboy who hid his burned face beneath his hat, certain that his scars made him unworthy of love. But Delilah Fairfield had reached up and brushed aside that hat, and in doing so, she had given him back his life. She had shown him that being broken was not the same as being beyond repair, that surviving was not a curse but a gift, that he deserved happiness just as much as anyone else. And together, they had built something beautiful and lasting, a love story that transcended the scars and the pain to become something pure and true and extraordinary. It was a story that would be told and retold through the generations of their family, a reminder that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is allow yourself to be seen, and the kindest thing you can do is see someone else with love. The end.